The howling wind of the Wyoming blizzard nearly swallowed Willa Bedford's desperate prayers as she clutched her 3-day-old daughter against her chest, each labored step through knee-deep snow threatening to be her last. December 1875 had shown no mercy to the young widow, who'd buried her husband just a week before giving birth alone in their isolated cabin miles from Sweetwater Springs. Beau Callahan hadn't intended to ride through Elk Mountain Pass during the worst storm of the season, but the seasoned cowboy had miscalculated both the weather and the daylight. Now, as his exhausted horse trudged through the blinding whiteness, he squinted against the stinging snow, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him, a figure impossibly small against the vast, unforgiving landscape wavered in the distance. "Whoa, thunder," he murmured, pulling his bandana down from his frost-covered beard. The horse snorted, steam billowing from its nostrils as Beau leaned forward, straining to see through the wall of white. There it was again, movement where no living thing should be in this murderous cold. Willa could no longer feel her feet. The threadbare blanket wrapped around little Sarah provided meager protection against the cutting wind. Her milk had nearly dried up from exhaustion and cold, and the crushing weight of her situation pressed down harder than the relentless snow on her shoulders. One more step, just one more step toward town. When she heard the approaching hoofbeats, Willa thought death had finally come for her in some strange form. She stopped, swaying dangerously, no longer certain which direction led to salvation. "Madam!" The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere in the howling storm. "Madam, what in God's name are you doing out here?" Beau dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, sinking to his thighs in snow as he approached the small figure. Only when he stood before her did he realize she held a bundle against her chest. His heart dropped like a stone when he saw the tiny, blue-tinged face of an infant peeking out from the wrappings. "My baby?" Willa whispered through cracked, bleeding lips. "Please, help my Sarah." Without hesitation, Beau removed his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around the woman and child. "You'll freeze to death out here," he said, his voice gruff with concern as he lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness. "What's your name, madam?" Willa Bedford," she managed, clinging to consciousness as fiercely as she clung to her child. Beau mounted behind her, one arm secure around her waist while the other held the reins. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear as he turned Thunder toward the only shelter he knew of within miles, his own small homestead. "Willa Bedford," he said with quiet determination, "you'll never walk alone again." The journey to Beau's cabin passed in a blur of white and cold for Willa. She drifted in and out of awareness, the steady heartbeat of the man behind her and the precious weight of Sarah in her arms the only anchors to reality. Occasionally, Beau's deep voice would rumble through the storm, sometimes speaking to her, sometimes to the horse, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in the vast emptiness anymore. When they finally arrived at the small but sturdy log cabin nestled in a protected hollow, Beau acted with the efficiency of a man accustomed to surviving on his own. He dismounted quickly, lifted Willa and Sarah down, and hurried them inside before returning to shelter Thunder in the adjoining lean-to stable. The cabin's interior was simple but surprisingly neat. A banked fire glowed in the stone hearth, and Beau immediately set about building it up, speaking over his shoulder as he worked. "Been living here 3 years now. It ain't much, but it's warm and dry." The fire blazed to life under his skilled hands. "Let's get you and the little one warmed up first." Willa stood just inside the door, shivering uncontrollably, unable to release her death grip on Sarah. The baby had been ominously quiet during the journey, but now gave a weak cry that sounded like music to Willa's ears. "She's alive," Willa whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "My Sarah's alive." Beau approached cautiously, as if she were a spooked mare. "Madam Willa, you need to get out of those wet clothes. I've got some things might fit you well enough." He gestured to a small chest near the bed. "I'll turn my back while you change. Then we need to tend to the little one." Willa hesitated, her frozen mind struggling to process his words. "I promise you're safe here," Beau added softly, understanding her fear. "I give you my word as a man who was raised right by good Christian folks." Something in his steady blue eyes convinced her. Willa nodded shakily and allowed him to take Sarah while she fumbled with her ice-encrusted clothing. True to his word, Beau kept his back turned, focusing entirely on the infant in his large, calloused hands. "She's mighty small," he commented, his voice gentler than Willa would have thought possible from such a rugged man. "How old is she?" "3 days," Willa answered, pulling one of his flannel shirts over her head. It hung to her knees, warm and smelling of pine and smoke. "Born during the first snow." Beau nodded, carefully unwrapping the baby by the fire's warmth. "My ma was a midwife, helped bring half the babies in Laramie County into the world. Taught me a thing or two before she passed." His hands moved with surprising dexterity as he checked the infant. "She's cold, but her color's coming back. Let's get her wrapped proper." He retrieved a soft rabbit fur blanket from a trunk and swaddled Sarah with expert care. When he handed the baby back to Willa, their fingers brushed, and for a moment, something electric passed between them, a connection forged in the shared effort to preserve this tiny life. "Thank you," Willa whispered, cradling Sarah close. "We would have died out there." Beau shrugged, suddenly awkward. No man worth his salt would leave a woman and baby in a blizzard. He turned to a pot hanging near the fire. "Got some stew here. You need to eat, especially if you're feeding the little one." As he ladled the hearty venison stew into a wooden bowl, Willa took the opportunity to truly see her rescuer for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the open sky, Beau Callahan couldn't have been more than 30. His dark hair curled damply around his collar, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that seemed more accustomed to firm lines than smiles. But it was his eyes that caught and held her attention, blue as a summer sky, with a depth of kindness that belied his rough exterior. "How did you come to be walking through a blizzard with a newborn?" Beau asked as he handed her the steaming bowl. Willa's hands trembled as she accepted it. "My husband, Thomas, died of fever 8 days ago. We have had a small homestead about 15 miles east of here." She paused, the words catching in her throat. "Sarah came early, just after I buried him. I tried to stay at the cabin, but we ran out of firewood, and I was afraid." Her voice broke. "You were afraid you'd both freeze to death." Beau finished for her, his expression somber. She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I thought I could make it to Sweetwater Springs. Thomas always said it wasn't so far if you followed Elk Creek." Willa looked down at Sarah, now sleeping peacefully in the warm cabin. "I realize now how foolish that was." "Not foolish," Beau corrected gently. "Desperate, maybe. Brave, certainly. But not foolish." Their conversation was interrupted by a particularly violent gust of wind that rattled the cabin's shutters. Beau moved to the window, peering out at the worsening storm. "Won't be going anywhere for a few days," he observed. "This storm's settling in for a long stay." He turned back to Willa, his expression carefully neutral. "You and the little one can take the bed. I'll make up a pallet by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Beau said firmly. "You need proper rest, both of you." Too exhausted to argue, Willa nodded gratefully. After finishing her stew, she settled onto Beau's bed. Sarah nestled beside her. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Beau carefully arranging more wood on the fire, his profile outlined in golden light, a silent sentinel against the howling wilderness beyond the walls. When Willa woke hours later, the cabin was quiet except for the crackling fire and the soft sounds of Beau moving about the small space. Daylight, gray and diffuse, filtered through the oiled paper of the window. Sarah stirred beside her, making the small mewling sounds that signaled hunger. "Good morning," Beau said, noticing she was awake. "Storm's still going strong, but we're well stocked." He approached with a steaming cup. "Made some willow bark tea. Thought it might help if you're still sore from the birthing." Willa felt heat rise in her cheeks at his consideration. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the cup. As she sat up to drink it, Sarah's cries grew more insistent. Beau immediately turned his back. "I'll just see to the horse while you, attend to her needs." His respectful retreat gave Willa the privacy to nurse Sarah, though the baby's weak suckling concerned her. When Beau returned, stomping snow from his boots, she had finished feeding and was holding Sarah against her shoulder. "I'm worried she's not getting enough," Willa confessed. "My milk, with the cold and not eating properly." Beau nodded thoughtfully. "My ma always said goat's milk was next best to mother's milk for babies." He moved to a small pantry area. "Don't have a goat, but I do have some canned milk. We can water it down some. Ma used to add a bit of sugar to make it easier on tiny bellies." As the day progressed, Willa was continually surprised by Beau's knowledge and his gentle way with Sarah. He fashioned a makeshift cradle from a drawer lined with soft furs, helped prepare the diluted milk for when Willa's own supply seemed insufficient, and never once complained about the disruption to his solitary existence. "How does a bachelor cowboy know so much about babies?" Willa asked as they shared a simple lunch of cornbread and beans. A shadow crossed Beau's face. "Like I said, my ma was a midwife." He paused, staring into his coffee. "I was the oldest of 6. Helped raise the younger ones after Pa was killed in '62 at Shiloh." "You fought in the war?" Beau shook his head. "Too young. Was only 14 when Pa left. Had to stay home, help Ma with the little ones and the farm." His jaw tightened. "After Ma died of the consumption in '69, I kept the family together best I could. My youngest sister, Abigail, was just turning 8 when the fever took her in '71. The grief in his voice was still raw, even years later. Willa reached across the table impulsively, placing her hand on his. "I'm sorry." Beau looked at their hands for a long moment before gently withdrawing his. Other siblings scattered after that. Brother William headed to California. Sisters got married. I came west, worked cattle drives, saved enough for this place. He gestured around the cabin. "Not much, but it's mine." "It's a fine home," Willa said sincerely. Beau's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Kind of you to say, madam, but I reckon it looks mighty rough to a lady's eyes. A roof, walls, and warmth look like paradise to me right now," Willa replied, thinking of the lonely, cold cabin she'd fled. They fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine as the blizzard continued to rage outside. Beau insisted on taking the pallet by the fire despite Willa's protests, tended to thunder and the small woodpile in the lean-to during brief breaks in the storm, and proved remarkably adept at keeping the cabin warm and comfortable. On the third day, as Willa sat by the fire mending one of Beau's shirts while Sarah slept in her makeshift cradle, she found herself studying her rescuer as he cleaned his rifle at the table. His hands, large and calloused from years of hard work, moved with a precision and care that seemed at odds with their roughness. "Tell me about your husband," Beau said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. The question caught Willa off guard. "Thomas was kind," she began hesitantly. "We married 2 years ago in St. Louis. He had dreams of building a cattle ranch in Wyoming territory. Said a man could make his fortune with enough hard work and determination." "That's true enough with some luck thrown in," Beau commented. Willa nodded. "We didn't have the luck part. First winter was harder than we expected. Then drought last summer damaged what little crops we'd planted. Thomas took odd jobs at neighboring ranches when he could. But she trailed off, remembering the mounting desperation as their situation deteriorated. You loved him, Beau observed quietly. I did, Willa acknowledged, then added with unexpected honesty. Though perhaps not as deeply as a wife should, we were more partners in a shared dream then. Well, than what I'd imagined marriage would be. Beau's hands stilled on the rifle. And what did you imagine it would be? Willa looked into the fire, searching for words. Something like what my parents had. They would look at each other across a room, and you could feel the connection between them. Even after 20 years of marriage, my father would still bring my mother wildflowers for no reason at all. She smiled at the memory. When he died, I think a part of her went with him. That's rare, Beau said softly. I know, Willa agreed. Thomas was good to me, and I cared for him dearly. But that spark was missing. She shook her head, suddenly embarrassed by her candor. I shouldn't speak ill of him, especially now. Speaking truth isn't speaking ill, Beau replied. And there's no shame in honoring what was while acknowledging what wasn't. His insight surprised her. This quiet cowboy, who seemed so simple at first glance, repeatedly revealed depths she hadn't expected. That night, as the wind finally began to ease, Willa lay awake listening to Beau's steady breathing across the room. In just 3 days, this stranger had become something of a lifeline, not just because he'd rescued her from certain death, but because his steady presence offered a security she hadn't felt in years. It frightened her, this rapid attachment. Thomas was barely cold in his grave, and here she was, finding comfort in another man's home, another man's care. What kind of woman did that make her? Sarah's soft cooing interrupted her troubled thoughts. Willa leaned over the edge of the bed to check on her daughter and found the baby awake, tiny hands reaching up toward nothing in particular. The simple wonder of those perfect fingers against the firelight brought tears to Willa's eyes. She's a fighter. Beau's voice came softly from his palate. Gets that from her ma, I reckon. Willa looked over to find him propped up on one elbow, watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. I didn't mean to wake you, she whispered. Wasn't sleeping much, he admitted. Been thinking. About what? Beau sat up fully, running a hand through his tousled hair. About what happens when this storm breaks. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. What indeed would happen? Willa had no home to return to, no family, no means of supporting herself and Sarah. I could take you to Sweetwater Springs, Beau continued when she remained silent. Town's got a church with a ladies' aid society. They might help you get situated. The thought of charity, of being at the mercy of strangers' goodwill, made Willa's stomach tighten. I'm not looking for handouts, she said, more sharply than she intended. Never thought you were, Beau replied evenly. Just laying out the options as I see them. Willa gentled her tone. I appreciate that, truly. I need to find a way to stand on my own feet, for Sarah's sake. Beau nodded, his expression thoughtful. Might be another option, he said carefully. I've been saving to buy a small herd come spring. Place needs work to be a proper ranch, but the bones are good. Land's fertile, water's reliable. What are you suggesting? Willa asked, her heart suddenly racing. Beau met her eyes steadily. I'm suggesting that 2 people working together might accomplish more than one alone. You need a safe place for you and your daughter. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I need someone who reminds me why all this work matters. Beau Callahan, are you proposing some sort of business arrangement? Willa asked, trying to understand exactly what he was offering. I suppose I am, he said, though something in his eyes suggested there might be more to it than that. You'd have a home for you and Sarah. I'd have helped making this place into something worth building on. Come spring, we'd see where things stand. It wasn't a marriage proposal, they were still virtual strangers. After all, but it wasn't simply a business proposition either. It was something in between. A chance, an opportunity, a lifeline offered without demands or expectations. I should think on it, Willa said finally. Beau nodded, lying back down on his pallet. Of course, no need to decide tonight. But as Willa settled back against the pillows, Sarah now sleeping peacefully in her cradle, she knew her decision was already made. The alternatives throwing herself on the mercy of strangers in town, somehow trying to make it on her own with an infant paled in comparison to staying here, where she'd already begun to feel safe. Morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling wonderland. Beau went out early to check the surroundings and returned with news that the main trail to town would likely be passable within a day or two. Beautiful out there, he reported, stomping snow from his boots. Cold enough to freeze the ears off a brass monkey, but clear as crystal. Willa had Sarah wrapped warmly against her chest as she moved about the cabin, preparing a simple breakfast of flapjacks with the last of Beau's molasses. I've been thinking about your proposal, she said without preamble. Beau paused in the act of hanging up his coat. And I accept, Willa said, turning to face him. At least until spring, as you suggested. But I want to contribute my fair share. I won't be a burden or an object of pity. Never crossed my mind to pity you, Beau said seriously. A woman who walks through a blizzard to save her child isn't someone who needs pity. She's someone who deserves respect. His words warmed something inside Willa that had been cold for too long. Then we have an agreement? We do, Beau confirmed, extending his hand as if to seal a business deal. Willa shifted Sarah to one arm and took his offered hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and once again that strange current seemed to flow between them at the contact. Beau held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary, his blue eyes searching hers as if looking for something beyond the practical arrangement they just agreed to. I should go to my old cabin, Willa said, breaking the moment. There are things there, clothes, keepsakes. Things for Sarah I made while waiting for her arrival. Beau frowned. Weather's clear now, but that doesn't mean it's safe to travel, especially not with a newborn. I know, but I'll go, he interrupted. You tell me what to look for, where to find it, and I'll bring back what I can carry. Willa wanted to protest but knew he was right. Sarah was still too fragile for such a journey. You'd do that. Said you'd never walk alone again, didn't I? Beau replied simply. Meant it. The next morning, Beau set out at dawn with a detailed list of items to retrieve from Willa's homestead. The journey would take most of the day, even with good weather, and Willa found herself growing increasingly anxious as the hours passed. By mid-afternoon, she had cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, prepared a hearty stew for Beau's return, and changed the bedding twice out of nervous energy. Your mama's being silly, she told Sarah as she paced the floor with the baby. Mr. Callahan is perfectly capable of finding his way. But her words did little to ease the knot of worry in her stomach. As dusk approached with no sign of Beau, Willa's anxiety deepened. Had he lost his way? Encountered trouble? The possibilities multiplied in her mind until the sound of hoofbeats outside nearly made her weep with relief. Beau entered carrying 2 bulging saddlebags and what appeared to be a small wooden cradle. His face was wind-burned and weary, but he smiled when he saw Willa waiting. Found everything on your list, he announced, setting down his burdens. And thought this might be better for the little one than my drawer. He gestured to the cradle, a simple but beautifully crafted piece with a carved design of leaves along the sides. Thomas made it, Willa said softly, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I never thought I'd see it again." Beau nodded, understanding the significance. "Cabin's still standing, though it needs work. Roof's holding for now, but another heavy snow might cave it in." He hesitated before adding, "I tended to your husband's grave. Marker had fallen in the storm." The simple act of kindness, caring for the resting place of a man he'd never met, touched Willa deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. Beau shrugged off her gratitude, turning to unpack the saddlebags. "Brought what clothes I could find for you and the baby. Some household items that seemed important. There's a framed picture I wrapped careful like, and a small box that was hidden under a floorboard near the bed." Willa's eyes widened at the mention of the box. "You found that?" "Board was loose. Figured it might be important." It was important. The small wooden box contained the few pieces of jewelry Willa had inherited from her mother, including a gold locket with her parents' portraits inside, and the meager savings she and Thomas had managed to put aside. "This is everything," she said, clutching the box to her chest. "Everything that matters, anyway." That night, with Sarah sleeping soundly in her proper cradle and Willa's belongings carefully arranged in the cabin, something shifted between them. The place felt less like Beau's cabin, where Willa was staying temporarily, and more like a shared home. They sat before the fire after dinner, the quiet companionship more comfortable than Willa would have expected. "Tell me about your dreams for this place," Willa said, genuinely curious about the future Beau envisioned. Beau's expression softened as he gazed into the flames. "Nothing fancy. Good cattle on good land. Maybe 50 head to start, building to 100 or so. Not looking to be a cattle baron, just want something solid. Something that will last." He glanced at her. "What about you? Before all this happened, what did you want for your life?" The question made Willa realize how long it had been since she'd thought about her own desires, separate from Thomas's dreams or basic survival. "I always wanted children," she said, looking over at Sarah's cradle. "Beyond that, I suppose I wanted what most women want. A home filled with love and laughter. Enough security that I didn't have to worry about tomorrow. And," she hesitated. "And," Beau prompted. "And books," Willa admitted with a small smile. "I love to read. My father was a schoolteacher before he became a shopkeeper, and our house was full of books. I miss that, having stories to escape into." Beau stood and went to a small trunk in the corner. When he returned, he held 3 leather-bound volumes. "Not much of a library," he said, offering them to her. "But they're yours to read if you'd like." Willa accepted the books with reverent hands. A collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans, and, surprisingly, Jane Eyre. "You've read Charlotte Bronte?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. A faint flush colored Beau's cheeks. "My sister Martha left it behind. Read it one winter when snow kept me inside for nearly a month. Didn't understand half of it, but—" He shrugged. "It passed the time." Willa bit back a smile at his obvious embarrassment. "It's one of my favorites," she said. "Though I wouldn't have expected to find it in a bachelor cowboy's cabin." "Well, I'm full of surprises," Beau replied with a hint of a smile, and Willa couldn't help but agree. The following weeks brought a rhythm to their shared existence that felt surprisingly natural. Beau taught Willa about caring for Thunder and the small flock of chickens he kept for eggs. She, in turn, transformed the bachelor's cabin into a more comfortable home, adding small touches that made the space feel lived in and cared for. Sarah thrived under their combined attention, growing stronger each day. Beau fashioned a small sling that allowed Willa to carry the baby while keeping her hands free for chores, and he seemed genuinely delighted by each of the infant's small milestones. "Look at that grip," he marveled one evening when Sarah wrapped her tiny fingers around his much larger one. "She's going to be strong like her mama." The casual compliment warmed Willa in a way she wasn't prepared for. More and more, she found herself watching Beau when he wasn't aware, the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he mended tack, the gentleness in his hands when he cared for an injured chicken, the rare but transformative smile that changed his entire face when something amused him. January gave way to February, bringing slightly longer days but persistent cold. Beau made regular trips to Sweetwater Springs for supplies, always returning with something special: peppermint candy, a length of ribbon, once even a small book of poetry he'd found at the general store. "Saw you finished the others," he said gruffly when he presented it to her. "Thought you might like something new to read." It was these small, thoughtful gestures that gradually wore down the walls Willa had built around her heart. This wasn't at all what she'd expected when she'd agreed to their arrangement. This growing awareness of him as more than just her rescuer or reluctant host. One evening in late February, as a gentle snow fell outside, Beau returned from checking his trap lines with a rabbit for their dinner. Willa was at the table, Sarah sleeping in her cradle nearby, mending one of Beau's shirts by the light of a kerosene lamp. The domesticity of the scene struck Beau as he stomped snow from his boots. This woman and child who had stumbled into his life during the worst blizzard in years had somehow transformed his solitary existence into something he'd never expected to have: a family, or at least the semblance of one. "You're staring," Willa observed without looking up from her sewing. Beau cleared his throat, embarrassed at being caught. "Just thinking how different this place looks with you and Sarah in it." Now Willa did look up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "Better or worse?" "Better," Beau said without hesitation. Didn't realize how empty it was before. The simple honesty of his statement hung in the air between them. Willa felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude or practical considerations. "I've been thinking," Beau continued, hanging his coat by the door. "Spring's coming. Snow's already starting to melt in the lower meadows." Willa tensed, reminded suddenly of their agreement's temporary nature. "Yes, it is. We talked about reassessing our arrangement come spring," Beau said, moving to stand near the fire, his back to her. "Thing is, I've done some assessing already." "And?" Willa's voice was barely above a whisper. Beau turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "And I can't imagine this place without you and Sarah in it anymore." Willa's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying, Beau?" He crossed the room to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas, still finding your footing. But I'm also saying that these past months have been the happiest of my life, and the thought of you leaving when the weather breaks makes me feel hollow inside." "Beau, I'm not asking for promises," he hurried on. "Just stay. Not as my housekeeper or partner in name only. Stay because maybe someday there could be more between us. If you wanted that, if you could see yourself wanting that." Willa looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw the future she'd never dared to hope for: not just security or survival, but the possibility of that rare connection she'd witnessed between her parents. The possibility of love. "I think," she said carefully, "that I already want that." The joy that bloomed across Beau's face was like sunrise after the longest night. With exquisite tenderness, he raised one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "May I kiss you, Willa Bedford?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Her answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his, a gentle confirmation of feelings that had been growing between them since that first night in the blizzard. The kiss remained soft, respectful, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Beau rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I never expected you," he whispered. "Never expected any of this." "Nor I," Willa admitted. "But I'm grateful for whatever twist of fate brought us together." That night, Their arrangement subtly but significantly changed. Beau still slept on his pallet by the fire, still maintained the respectful distance of a gentleman. But now there was an acknowledged current between them, a future being carefully, tenderly constructed. As March arrived with its temperamental weather and signs of approaching spring, Beau began preparations for expanding his small operation into the cattle ranch he'd envisioned. He rode to neighboring ranches to discuss purchasing stock, spent days repairing fences damaged by winter storms, and began clearing additional land for summer grazing. Willa threw herself into making the cabin a true home, planting the seeds of a kitchen garden as soon as the ground was workable, preserving the last of their winter stores, and planning for the future with a hope she hadn't felt in years. Sarah grew stronger every day, now smiling in recognition when either Beau or Willa spoke to her. Though she would never know her birth father, Willa took comfort in knowing her daughter would grow up with a man who already looked at her with such love and protection in his eyes. "She tried to roll over today," Willa told Beau one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Nearly made it, too." Beau smiled, his arm resting comfortably around Willa's shoulders. "She's determined, that one. Going to be running circles around us before we know it." The casual us, the assumption of a shared future, made Willa's heart swell. She leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she'd never expected to be again after Thomas's death. "I rode by Reverend Parker's place today," Beau said after a comfortable silence. "He mentioned he'd be coming out this way next week to visit the Hendersons." Willa looked up at him questioningly. "Thought maybe," Beau continued, suddenly seeming nervous, "he might stop here too. If you were amenable." "Amenable to what exactly?" Willa asked, though she suspected she knew where this conversation was heading. Beau shifted to face her directly, taking both her hands in his. "Willa Bedford, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know it might seem too soon after Thomas. But I also know that some things in life are certain, and the way I feel about you and Sarah is one of those things." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'd do me the honor of becoming my wife, of making this family we've started official in the eyes of God and the law." Though she'd half expected the proposal, the reality of it, the earnest love in Beau's eyes, the slight tremor in his usually steady hands brought tears to Willa's eyes. "People will talk," she said softly. "They'll say it's too soon after Thomas. They'll speculate about why we're rushing." "Let them talk," Beau replied without hesitation. "We know the truth of what's between us. That's all that matters." Willa thought of the lonely, desperate woman she'd been just months ago, trudging through a blizzard with nothing but determination and prayers keeping her going. She thought of Beau's promise that night, "You'll never walk alone again," and how completely he'd kept that vow in ways neither of them could have anticipated. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hands. "Yes, I'll marry you, Beau Callahan." The kiss that followed sealed their promise to each other, tender at first, then deepening with the months of growing affection and mutual respect that had laid the foundation for their love. Reverend Parker performed the simple ceremony the following week in the cabin that had become their home. The Hendersons from the neighboring ranch stood as witnesses, Mrs. Henderson cooing over Sarah while Mr. Henderson clapped Beau on the back in congratulation. "Never thought I'd see the day," the older rancher teased. "Bachelor Beau tamed at last." "Not tamed," Beau corrected, his eyes finding Willa across the room. "Just finally found what I was looking for without knowing I was searching." Their wedding night was a tender discovery of each other, hesitant at first as they navigated the transition from friends to lovers, then giving way to a passion that surprised them both in its intensity. Afterward, as they lay entwined in what was now truly their bed, Willa traced the lines of Beau's face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Happy?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing with it the cattle Beau had saved for, the flourishing of Willa's garden, and the steady growth of their love for each other. Sarah took her first halting steps in July, toddling from Willa's arms to Beau's outstretched hands, while both parents watched with tearful pride. By autumn, Willa's body was changing again, carrying the new life they'd created together. When she shared the news with Beau, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for, joy mixed with protective concern, already planning expansions to the cabin to accommodate their growing family. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Long as they're healthy and have your spirit. And your heart," Willa added, covering his hand with hers. Winter came again, but this time there was no fear, no desperation in its approach. The cabin was well stocked, the livestock secure in improved shelters, and their future as bright as the fire that kept the cold at bay. On the anniversary of the night they'd met, the night Beau had found Willa struggling through the blizzard, they sat before the hearth, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her room, the promise of their second child growing beneath Willa's heart. "I've been thinking about fate," Beau said, his fingers absently stroking Willa's hair as she leaned against him. "About how if I'd left Sweetwater Springs an hour earlier that day, or if you'd taken a different path through the mountains, we might never have found each other," Willa finished for him. Beau nodded, his expression solemn. "Terrifies me sometimes, how close we came to missing each other entirely. But we didn't," Willa reminded him, taking his hand and placing it over the slight swell of her stomach where their child grew. "And now we have this life together, this family. I thank God for it every day," Beau said, drawing her closer. "For the storm that brought you to me, for the strength that kept you going until I found you, for every moment since." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle unlike the raging blizzard of the previous year. Willa watched the flakes drift past the window, no longer seeing them as harbingers of death, but as reminders of the night her life had been reborn. "You kept your promise," she murmured, nestling closer to her husband. "What promise is that?" Beau asked, though the softness in his eyes suggested he already knew. "The one you made the night we met," Willa said, turning her face up to his. "You said I'd never walk alone again." Beau's kiss was tender with remembered fear and present gratitude. "And you never will," he whispered against her lips. "Not as long as there's breath in my body." As the fire crackled and the snow continued its silent descent outside, Willa Bedford Callahan closed her eyes in contentment, secure in the knowledge that the desperate journey through last year's blizzard had led her not just to safety, but to a love and happiness greater than she'd ever dared to dream possible. In the years that followed, the Callahan ranch grew and prospered, as did their family. Benjamin was born in the spring, a strong boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, twin girls Abigail and Martha, named for Beau's lost sister, and the one who had moved away, joined the family, bringing both joy and cheerful chaos to the ranch. Sarah grew into a capable young woman who adored her younger siblings and showed a natural affinity for the ranch work that was her father's passion. Though she never remembered the desperate journey of her first days of life, the story of how Beau had found Willa and Sarah in the blizzard became family legend, told and retold on winter evenings by the fire. Sweetwater Springs grew from a small settlement into a proper town, and the Callahan Ranch became known for its quality stock and the warm hospitality of its owners. Travelers passing through often commented on the unusual harmony of the household, the obvious love between Beau and Willa, the well-behaved children, the sense of peace that seemed to permeate the place. Few knew the full story of how their union had begun in desperation and blossomed into one of the territory's most admired marriages. Even fewer understood the depth of gratitude Beau and Willa felt for each day they were granted together, having come so close to never finding each other at all. On their 20th anniversary, with their children nearly grown and the ranch flourishing beyond their earliest dreams. Beau presented Willa with a small wooden box he'd crafted himself. Inside lay a silver pendant in the shape of a snowflake, intricately detailed and polished to a high shine. "To remember," he said simply as he fastened it around her neck. No further explanation was needed. The snowflake rested against Willa's heart as a permanent reminder of the storm that had nearly taken her life, but had instead given her everything she'd ever wanted: a home filled with love and laughter, security for her children, and a man who had kept his promise through all the years, ensuring she never walked alone again.